This week, we're going to the lake, and what we'll find beneath the surface will haunt you. Some lakes are mirrors. They hold the day's light on their surface, but they also keep their night secrets down in the deep. You can't see them from the shore. You have to know where to look. You have to be willing to take a dive. Hello, my darlings, and welcome back to R.I.P. You and I, we gather here in this twilight space to whisper about the lives that ended too soon, the shadows that remain, and the mysteries that dare us to stare into the dark a little longer than is comfortable. Tonight, we're not just telling a story, we're stepping into a southern gothic puzzle, a crime that feels as deliberate as it is grotesque, and it begins with a missing head and ends with a weighted body pulled from Georgia's Lake Oconee. This is the story of Russell and Shirley Dermott. But before we dive in, I want to personally welcome you. If you're new here, I'm your host, Lindsay Legrand, and I'm delighted you're here. Welcome to R.I.P., as I said, presented by Chicken Wrap Productions, where we cover unsolved murder cases in the hopes of making a difference in one of these cases someday. Remember, this isn't just me speaking to you. This is us. And if this case sparks a theory, if you've ever been to Lake Oconee and heard something from someone or felt something, reach out. Leave me a voice message, a comment, a DM. We build these lanterns together, my darlings, and the more lights we have, the better we can see what's hiding in the dark. So without further ado, get ready to rest in peace. On the lake. Picture it with me. Lake Oconee in May. The air smells faintly of pine and warm earth. The water stretches in soft glassy ripples, 19,000 acres of it, ringed by coves and inlets that seem to promise privacy, or is it secrecy? It's the kind of place you'd imagine rocking gently on a porch swing, tea glass sweating in your hand. For Russell and Shirley Dermott, they made this their forever home. They lived in Reynolds Plantation, a gated community where golf carts hum along manicured paths and neighbors wave when they pass. Russell, 88, was a retired businessman, a Hardee's franchisee who'd built and sold multiple locations. He was sharp, measured, the kind of man who still read the paper every morning in his pressed button-down shirt. Shirley, his wife, 87, was the counterbalance. Gracious, sociable, the kind of hostess you knew would remember how you take your coffee. They had been married for 62 years, raised 3 children, already had buried one, their son Mark, who was killed in the year 2000, in what police said was a drug-related shooting in Atlanta. Friends say they never fully healed from that loss, but they carried on together. They weren't the kind of couple anyone expected to meet a violent end, but in May 2014, violence came to find them. This is the first discovery. You see, it started with an absence. On Saturday, May 3rd in 2014, the Dermotts didn't show up for a Kentucky Derby party that they had RSVP'd to. Friends assumed maybe they were tired or changed plans. But by Tuesday, May 6th, that absence had sharpened into alarm. A neighbor went to check. The front door was unlocked. Inside the garage, Russell was lying on the floor. He was dressed in a polo shirt and shorts, like maybe he'd been heading outside. But something was dreadfully wrong. His head was gone. It was removed completely. The rest of the house, immaculate. No signs of forced entry, no sign of his wife Shirley. Naturally, the sheriff is called, and Sheriff Howard Sills arrives on the scene. A man typically not prone to theatrics, called it one of his most strange and disturbing crime scenes of his career. For a seasoned veteran, you can imagine that's quite a statement. Now the search for Shirley begins. For 10 days, the question hung heavy in the air. where was Shirley? Not to mention the outrageous question that was still lurking about, where was her husband's head? Investigators searched the wooded shoreline. They used sonar to scan the lake's floor. The lake itself is deep in places, up to 225 feet, and shaped like sort of an ink blot, with countless nooks and channels. It's awfully easy to hide something very effectively there. On May 16th in 2014, 2 fishermen spotted something floating near a dam about 5 miles from the German's home. Just as you suspected, darling, it was Shirley. Her body had been weighted down with concrete blocks and dumped in the lake. The medical examiner determined she died from blunt force trauma to the head. This confirmed what the community already feared. This wasn't a case of a spouse killing a spouse. Both Russell and Shirley had been murdered. First of all, I just want to unpack the theory that anyone thought, I don't know, I suppose it's rather, you never can tell what people are capable of. If this podcast has taught me anything, it's that. That said, I imagine that the people who knew Russell and Shirley probably were not casting real suspicion on Shirley. Having been married for 62 years, I think there's a high likelihood that this was an outside job. But let's consider the evidence, or rather, the evidence that isn't there. No valuables were taken. No obvious motive ever emerged. There were no fingerprints or DNA that pointed to a suspect. And Russell's head? Never, ever found. Theories sort of swirl around that detail in particular. Removing the head could conceal a gunshot wound. Fair point. Maybe even a different specific injury, or even the caliber of a bullet. It could also be meant to delay identification, though in this case, Russell's identity was fairly obvious, especially since he was found laying in his own garage. Sheriff Sills has repeatedly said this crime likely involved more than one person. You don't decapitate an 88-year-old man and transport an 87-year-old woman's body to a lake without some type of help. So let's take a second to look at some of the other theories that arose out of this case. Theory 1, a targeted robbery gone horribly wrong. The trouble with this theory is, why leave all the valuables entirely untouched? It's clear in this case, after finding both bodies, that both victims were subdued, and I would imagine that would provide a perfect backdrop for someone who's robbing their home to make off with all of their finest things, and yet not a single thing was missing. Theory 2 is retaliation for something in Russell's past, perhaps his business dealings, or maybe even something about his son's murder, but nothing concrete really connects any of these things. Theory 3 involves a deeply personal attack committed by someone that the Germans knew, trusted, and potentially let inside. I think this one is probable because there were no signs of forced entry in the home, and knowing that things were really very untouched would suggest that the Germans were not panicked. They were not running around the house knocking things over, running to the phone, that this was something unexpected. Though this is all my own personal conjecture, and I want to be clear about that. There is another theory, a professional hit. The precision, the disposal, the lack of trace evidence could suggest that this was committed by someone who had some experience committing murder. For my part, I think that this had to be someone that the couple knew. It appears to me to be someone they trusted enough to let into their home, and somebody that I think it was just one person myself. I think it was one person who had some sort of grudge or vendetta. There's a far-fetched part of me that thinks that maybe Russell was doing some investigative work in his retirement on his son's murder, and perhaps started cutting a little close to the bone, maybe coming up with more evidence than he should have known, or perhaps what he was coming to know was a threat to someone in some way. Today, nearly a decade later, this is where things stand. The case is still open. Sheriff Stills still says he'll never give it up, And you can hear in his voice that this is one that weighs on him. Lake Okanee has gone back to its rhythms naturally, summer skies, autumn fishermen, winter stillness. But under its surface lies a truth that hasn't risen yet. And somewhere, someone knows exactly where Russell's head is. If you have information about the murders of Russell and Shirley Drummond, call the Putnam County Sheriff's Office at 706-485-8557. You can remain anonymous to share any tip with them. And now, for your sneaky little peek, what's on next week? Next week we meet a girl whose name was a lie. Or was it a secret? She called herself Tanya Hughes. She was beautiful, young, and already exceedingly haunted by her unspeakable past. Her life ended tragically on the side of an Oklahoma highway, a hit and run, they said. But behind the name, behind the smile in the photographs, was a truth so twisted, so cruel, it took decades to piece together. A runaway? A victim? Or something far more sinister? That's what we'll be teasing out next week on RIP. Thank you so much for being here. We're so delighted to have you each and every week. My darlings, we've stood together on the dock, peering into the black water, searching for what's been hidden. And that's what I love about you, your courage, your curiosity, and the way you stayed with me until the very end. We will keep this light burning. We will keep their names alive and known. I love you endlessly. Until next time, keep your light close, your shadows closer, and rest always in peace.